Never before has gambling been so heavily promoted and accessible, especially through sport. This makes it feel like a normal part of the game and harder for students to recognise the potential harm. We want students to love the game, not the odds. The School Education Program is here to support you, to help your students develop healthy and informed attitudes to gambling as they approach adulthood. This instruction video and the unit it explains forms part of a wider suite of resources and tools to assist you and your school tackle this important wellbeing issue. This video supports the role of regulation unit of work, which can be downloaded from our website. It's really flexible. You can deliver it as one discrete unit or pick and modify tasks to suit your students' needs. For optimal results, we'd suggest sticking with the recommended terminology and learning outcomes. The primary learning intention of this unit is to understand that gambling is an inherently risky activity, and regulation exists to help protect Australian and Victorian citizens from gambling harm. On completion, students can be assessed against the Victorian curriculum Humanities dimension, Civics and Citizenship, under the Citizenship, Diversity and Identity strand. The unit focuses particularly on the third elaboration, creating an article, argumentative essay, panel discussion or debate about a contemporary issue. There's an assessment rubric included in the appendix to help you.
All the material is given to you by the program. There's lesson plans and an outline that's very clear. It was quite fun to run with the students, really engaging, different type of activities inside that unit, really encouraged other students that normally don't really participate to join in the conversation and the discussion about gambling itself.
Like any potentially sensitive topic, we'd recommend you and your class set some ground rules together to promote a safe learning space, covering things like how to fairly and respectfully participate in class discussions, what's appropriate to disclose in the classroom, and what students can do if they feel uncomfortable. When discussing gambling with students, be mindful not to give the impression that betting underage is normal. This unit includes online research, so before you start, make sure students have internet access. The tuning in section of the learning sequence can take an hour or more. How long you spend will depend on your students' existing level of knowledge. You can start with some games or mind mapping to activate their prior knowledge about types of gambling, the risks involved, and the places where they see advertising. The activities suggested on page 6 are just examples. You might have alternative activities in mind. When discussing types of gambling, try to avoid mentioning specific brand names, as this may inadvertently promote the company in question. Instead, think about different categories, like sports betting, lotteries, and pokies. When broaching the concept of risk, be mindful that often students are of the opinion they won't run into serious trouble. Try to focus on short-term harms, such as being unable to purchase items they want. This will help students recognise the trade-off between spending money on gambling and being able to afford the things they value, such as having the means to go out with mates or the latest smartphone. While teaching this unit, try to replace the term gambling with betting, as students tend to relate to this better. Explain to students that these two terms can be used interchangeably. Explain that Australia is a democratic country. However, there is still a need for regulation to help citizens avoid potential harm. Ask students to provide examples of risky activities other than gambling that are regulated to help protect people. Some examples might be alcohol, driving, and tobacco. To help consolidate understanding, ask them to complete the questions outlined in the post-discussion reflection activity on page 6. The next section further investigates the need for gambling regulation in Australia. It should take 30 to 45 minutes. Ask students whether or not Australians under 18 should be allowed to gamble. Students should cast their votes by standing in designated areas of the classroom representing yes, no, and maybe. You can use the classroom whiteboard to indicate these positions, as seen here in this video. You can run this activity with a small portion of the class or the entire group. Once students have selected a position, ask them to explain their thinking. Through further class discussion, reaffirm why risky activities such as gambling require regulation. It might be handy to write the risks associated with gambling on the board or poster paper for future reference. Following this, brainstorm gambling regulations that your students are already aware of, both in Australia and Victoria. This next section can be spaced out over a few lessons, depending on how much time you have available and your students' needs. Here, students will complete a web quest to learn more about gambling regulation in Victoria and Australia. They'll use this knowledge to create a list of facts that can be included in a podcast for young people aged 16 to 20. You can modify this task by asking students to write out the full script for the podcast or make a recording to share with classmates. Time permitting, there is an extension activity to research how gambling is regulated overseas and how these laws compare with existing Australian and Victorian laws. This activity is designed to make the connection to the global community. Students can conduct their research in numerous ways, including researching online or interviewing a subject who has lived overseas. To encourage good research practice, ask students to reference all of their research. An assessment rubric for the WebQuest activity has been included in the appendix on page 13. It is important that partial or full achievement of learning outcomes are noted. This rubric can be completed by students as a self-assessment, by teachers and with peers. Help students to reflect on elements they've achieved and areas for future improvement. That concludes our instruction video for this unit. If, while completing this, you become concerned that gambling may be an issue for one of your students or their family and friends, you can refer them to our free and confidential Gamblers Health Youthline support service. They can call 1-800-262-376 or visit gamblershelp.com.au/Youthline. You can also contact this service for advice and support. We'd encourage you to let your school's wellbeing staff know that you're undertaking this unit, and be aware of who to inform if you become concerned. For more information, visit our Love the Game website.